believe it comes from a place of genuine, authentic care for that person. Many of those people are Etsy sellers who wake up every day and take their creative passion and turn it into an actual product they make with their own hands and they sell. And we want to support those people and we want to protect those people. And I know that many of these policies are intended to help our sellers. And honestly, from a first order effect, Etsy is probably better positioned than almost anyone in that if de minimis exemptions go away in China, where candidly, I think there's a ton of abuse, but we maintain de minimis exemptions in Europe, between the US and Europe. I think that Etsy buyers and sellers will largely not have any impact from tariffs. However, if the result is inflation and American consumers feeling much poorer, that would be very bad for Etsy. That would be very bad for Etsy sellers. So what we most need is a vibrant economy with healthy U.S. consumers to support our sellers. And then we want to do that within a construct of fair trade and common sense reform.
Say, here's our commercial plan. We're going to build capacity in the United States. We do have grant money to help support that from Congress already. Right. And definitely in the reconciliation bill, we are talking as well about this is an area that I think some catalyzing investment makes sense. And I'm talking now about fission, what we have, but I should also say fusion power. I went to college 40 years ago, fired up to work on fusion energy. It's what powers the stars. And humans are a genius. Of course, we'll figure it out. Now, good thing I didn't stay in that field because we don't have a business of it yet. But I'll tell you, the progress and the state of affairs today is incredibly exciting. At Lawrence Livermore National Labs at the Department of Energy only a little over 2 years ago, for the first time, we got more energy out of a fusion reaction than put in to light the fuel on fire. Just recently, I don't think we've announced it yet, a much higher multiple of energy out versus energy in. And we've got a number of commercial fusion companies. Definitely in the next several years, we're going to see at scale much more energy come out than goes in fusion devices. It's a little bit of time after that to make it commercial and machines and all that, but it's coming. It's not a maybe someday, always 20 years away thing. Watch the news. Fusion energy in the next 4 years is going to be very exciting. And so we're looking to how can we help catalyze that as well. Tariffs, and I think it's disturbing to people. It's uncertain because we're in the middle of it. But let me just hit the 2 points about what's the president's plan here? What's the agenda? It's driven by two things. Since the end of World War II, the United States has been incredibly welcoming to import products from all the nations of the world. I celebrate that. The goal of the president is to get all of the nations of the world equally welcoming to American exports as we've been to their exports. That's a grow trade agenda. The other piece of the president's agenda is to try to find the right incentives to reshore manufacturing in the United States. Over the last 25 years, a lot of energy-intensive manufacturing has left the United States. Well, we could buy it cheaper from Asia, people said. So, no big deal. But those jobs, in large-scale industrial jobs in energy-intensive manufacturing, they tend to be blue-collar, often concentrated in rural areas. This is just the demographic that's had a rough ride in the last 30 years. If you lived in an urban area and you're highly educated, boy, it's been a great few decades. I've been very lucky in my life. But if you grew up in a rural area or a less thriving community and didn't get the same educational opportunity as the rest of us, your economic opportunities have actually gotten worse. The president is deeply committed to make the economic opportunities better for those people, and so he wants an agenda that makes it compelling to invest in the United States and put those jobs here. And the last thing, as an energy nerd, can I repeat my thoughts? So manufacturing, people, when we think about energy, people either talk about the electricity grid or they talk about automobiles. And of course, those are important and real uses of energy. And I love the electricity grid. But the energy delivered on the electricity grid to end users represents 20% of total global energy. People think it's like the same thing. It's a piece. It's a sliver. We use about a quarter of energy for transportation. But the biggest use of energy by far is manufacturing, making things. And you can't make an automobile or a building or an internet or an airplane without materials. We spend 20% of all global energy just to make cement, steel, plastics, and fertilizer. The 4 pillars of the modern world. 20% of energy just to make those 4. We use over 40% of global energy just to make things. aluminum and other metals and polysilicon and all these materials. This is the base of which everything else is made of.
We have seen this administration come in and talk about bold new initiatives like the Golden Dome and talk about increasing spending on national security. So those two things can happen simultaneously and actually give us more resources as a nation to spend on the things that'll really make a difference on the battlefield.
Okay, a couple of things here, and you just brought up the Golden Dome. I'm glad you did. But there are all kinds of questions about whether we could have something similar. I mean, Israel is a very small country, so it's easier at least to have the Iron Dome protecting that. But have you had any conversations about the Golden Dome concept? Are you angling for that contract? Have you spoken to anybody about it?
We have, and it is not just a contract. It's likely to be many programs and capabilities. Yes, so certainly we are seeing inflationary impacts on the B-21 program, which was priced back in 2016 and is now being delivered. We all know that inflation has been at levels we did not anticipate over the last decade. So that has had an impact. But I do want to correct the record in that it is still below the cost targets that the government set for the B-21 Raider. So it is viewed as a model program because it is delivering costs. We are working to mitigate those. We, unlike most, have almost all of our supply chain sourced from America, and many of our products built exclusively in America. And so we just don't have the volume of tariffs that most companies do. For us, it's less than 5% of our supply chain is sourced outside the United States.
Thank you, Tim. First, I would like to thank you for the invitation to the panel. But maybe about Pegasus, I just would like to say a kind of an overview of what we're doing. We're an airline based in Turkey, having the LCC model. We're running 120 aircraft and carrying close to 40 million passengers. We're the second biggest carrier of Turkey. We're not flying to US, we're flying to Europe, Middle East, and also North Africa. So this is the overview of the airline. And now in the airline business, you're very right to say that we have lots of parameters affecting the cost structure of the airline. The main one is, of course, the fuel cost, about 35 to 40%, depending on the rate of the fuel, the price of the fuel. But uncertainty actually is the nature of the business. I mean, we have every year, because we're impacted for different type of parameters, like social, economical, political, and everything. The aviation business, the airline itself, is successful as it navigates through those uncertainties. So I'm doing this business for over 30 years now. Like, I've never seen consecutive 3 to 4 years where we have all positive, everything as expected. So as the airlines, we should know how to tackle with those. And what we do is, on the LCC business, because the promise to our customers is the lowest fare possible. And this is how we make the airline grow sustainably and profitably.
Absolutely. So ultimately, we develop AI-powered command and control systems to power the most critical decision-making in the most complex domains. That's airline operations, air traffic management, military logistics. Ultimately, our customers all share a common problem, which is they find themselves increasingly operate in a uncertain, very dynamic world. The operating domain is changing rapidly. And what we help them with is to predict and simulate the operating domain. No matter if that is several hours out, several days, or several weeks out, we flag potential issues and then help them recover from situations that are not favorable to their operation. And that is really where AI is playing a significant role, given what is possible now with the latest models. It can shift these organizations from just looking at data displays that show them where the planes are or where the weather is to a world where you can see, hey, this is the future state of my operations. This is where my flights are going to be. This is where my cargo is going to be. And this is how my operation is going to be impacted downstream. So you can be more proactive in how you run the entire organization. And that is absolutely critical in these complex operations because it's so hard to recover once things are falling apart because there's so many moving pieces.
Do you have like activities? And then the ones that are known the most are the automotive, and then we run 3 brands under 2 different entities. So the Harley brand and the Genesis brand, which is the premium brand within the group, and then the Kia one, 2 different companies. But a lot of things that most of the customers don't know is that we are in many other businesses which are related directly or indirectly to create the vertical integration, which I think gives the group a competitive advantage, including logistics with lobbies, including Boston Dynamics robotics, including some activities in AI, also with Boston Dynamics, including mobility with Emotional, which is based out of Boston, including Supernal, which is a eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing. Just to mention some, because we're also in construction of multiple things, including nuclear power plants and then engineering. So we also have affiliated companies and group companies in marketing, in ocean and others. So it's really huge. I know the numbers are not perfect, but just to give some sense, it is about $330+ billion of revenues in the group on a yearly basis. And then even though we are number 3 global OEM, I think revenues are really on the group even larger than the number 1 in sales, which is Toyota, right?
And particularly your U.S. sales have been quite strong.
Well, U.S. has become now the most important market for us. It represents about 1/3 of the sales.
A bigger picture. What I've been saying to people is not in the White House. Would never say this in the White House, but everyone else. After spending a lot of time in the White House, talking to a lot of the cabinet secretaries, talking to the president. We should all take a breath. Like, we're not to the end state yet. We're in the process, and we should all wait to get closer to the end state. And the other thing I would say is, having spent a lot of time there back in March, I was not surprised at a large tariff. I didn't know what it would be, but I thought it was going to be larger than the market expected. Also, when it happened, expected that it was just the first move of the chess game and that there were a lot of moves left to come. And I think part of that comes from whether you think it's the right tactic or not. I think it's easy to argue that it's, the tactics. But I think the president has a genuine desire to make things better for middle class Americans to create good careers. The kind of careers, by the way, that United Airlines, one of the few people who still create, one of the few places where, people with a high school education can come and, once they get to the top of the seniority scale, have good benefits, get to, with overtime, get to 6-digit incomes, support a family, buy a house, have a career, work at one place for 40 years and retire, with a solid future. And he's trying to create those kinds of jobs. I think tariffs are about that. I think that's the biggest motivation is to kind of create those. I think it's more complicated than tariffs to actually do it, but that's the motivation. And when you I felt like I've spent enough time here to understand what they're doing. And so it's not terribly surprising. And it's a lot easier to deal with the world when you're not surprised and you understand the why, then you're just guessing and feeling like chaos and uncertainty. Those are not words I use like with my board or anyone. I feel like I have a more grip. Whether you agree or disagree, I have more grip on where we're headed.
We didn't have amongst the world's largest retail malls, the Dubai Mall. We actually didn't even have long-haul flights from Dubai to anywhere in the world beyond 7 hours. And, you look where we are today, it's an astonishing development. 25 years ago, it was the year 2000. In the year 2000, we had 3 million visitors to Dubai. It was a record. Today, we have 3 million visitors every 2 months to Dubai. Tourists represent 5 times our resident population. And our resident population last year grew 6%. Business licenses in Dubai last year grew 30%. So we continue on a very rapid acceleration. And, it's amazing to see what the city has achieved.
Yeah. So people know it now, right? When you tell them Dubai,
They kind of understand what the brand is, what the appeal is. They do. They know Dubai for a number of reasons. Of course, they go beyond the Dubai chocolate, which is, of course, the latest social media viral campaign. We'll get to that. But I think the level of awareness for Dubai today is really second to none. You know, on the back of COVID and how we managed COVID on an absolute and relative basis, it really created a lot of credibility. You know, people that were in the city were really experiencing what Dubai was like, not only to visit, because we were open.
83,000 customers worldwide, and it is a pretty good temperature, and that temperature is uncertainty. And so each one has different solutions that they're looking for to do this. So we have some customers that are changing, say, their origin destination of their goods because of uncertainty. We had a real life situation, a customer who exported pet food from the U.S. to China. Their duties changed midway through the journey. It would have been a $6 million duty. Had it landed in China, we had to help them move it to Japan. So customers are trying to figure out their supply chains, but it's not new. Supply chains have been changing since the financial crisis, and they've been getting more resilient. So a number of customers have really changed and propped up their supply chains. However, when you have the two largest economies going head to head a bit, no one can really anticipate that. So there is some uncertainty and change, and we're right in the middle of it.
So uncertainty, a variety of sources. I think Bank of America's come out and said this, but we see 5, 6 of these panels, and obviously we see our own demand. The consumer spending is held pretty steady, so that there's been no real drop off. There's a few categories that had a little bit of pull forward, which I think was like a very short lived. But basically things are steady. The question really I think folks are asking is what will happen in X period of time, 2 months time, 3 months time, 4 months time, if prices go up and availability gets more limited, you know, what would happen to demand then? And I think that's where some of these consumer sentiments surveys, which show declining sentiment, particularly forward looking, I think play a role. But to date, that has not yet come to pass.
I mean, Dave, I would think,
You know, what are the inches of clearance to the bottom of the bed? All these types of detailed things. Well, on a given item, we're missing some number of those attributes always. Well, one of the things we found is we can now fill those in accurately using Gen AI. So now all of a sudden the customer's search and navigation experience can be heightened. Or a lot of what we've been a kind of an innovator around digital imagery. So now you can basically help someone really navigate from the standpoint of you take photos of their room, and you can start generating imagery that's for them using everything we've discerned about their style, the items they're looking at, their preferences. So
one thing that COVID did teach us very importantly is supply resilience. So when you talk about supply resilience, a lot of people mix up resilience and assurance. Assurance is making sure you can make stuff no matter what, if you lose power or anything, but it's local. What we've set out to do is supply resilience across the board. And what we've done is, although we have a fab geographically distributed footprint, we have 18 factories worldwide. A lot of them are in the US, but also overseas. So what you do is you start cross-pollinating technologies within fabs. Because look, whether it's COVID, it's tariff, I look at it as it's a disruption. It's, to me, the new normal. So you can't say, oh, no, I can't wait for it to go back to quote unquote normal. We're not. What the disruption is, I don't know. But there are strategies you can put in place of cross-pollination. You start becoming agnostic to what it is, whether it's a flood or a fire or a COVID or tariff. You just have to be able to think on your feet and move technology quickly in a world that is 2 to 3 years to build a fab. So how do you do that while you have a very broad network? And that's what we've been able to do. So we've navigated very well. We've supported the customers.
We have multiple grids. So you can have excess power in a certain region, but it's completely irrelevant because we're not building data centers. So what we have to create, what I think now, is forget about coal or renewables. We have to look at some kind of a Venn diagram of where do we have, what are the places in the country that I have the land, a positive regulatory environment, water, an abundance of water, and the ability to get electricity. I think to where we are today, most hyperscalers talked originally about we're going to do this as clean energy. I think now we have to think about how do we do an energy transition within the AI system, which is natural gas at the wellhead sort of closer by, with a horizon of having as much green power coming online. I think what Onsemi is doing and other companies of allowing to have the kind of battery storage that will be there. We're not there yet.
Build goods and sell goods effectively here in the US. And for these kind of customers, what Jonas said, actually we are seeing it with our customers. You're seeing more and more of that manufacturing demand move to the US. But it's not that all of it will move. I mean, obviously there are low value goods where it doesn't make sense unless you can automate it, you can have robots to do the work as opposed to humans to do the work. Then you can nearshore that. But when it comes to actual think of a electrical component manufacturer, well, they are spinning up more capacity here in the US. They already have plants here in North America. And what they're doing now is that they're moving more of that capacity to be built here. Now, for us as a transportation company, what we do for those customers, we are investing in the infrastructure here in North America. So we, over the last few years, we've added more than $1 billion worth of real estate, trucking terminals that enable us to get capacity for these customers. And you could have a customer who was shipping the product, say, from abroad to somewhere in the country, then we distribute the product from a warehouse distribution facility to the rest of the country. Now they're telling us, well, I'm going to expand production in Texas. Can you handle all the inbound freight to that facility and then all the outbound freight from that facility as well? So we're
a company. We want to build something that outlasts all of us, and that's a big North Star for us. So it's a question we ask ourselves regularly. What would we do if we were to start Atlassian today? So we ask ourselves that question every year. And first of all, one thing I think that remains unchanged, the thing that has been constant, is we would still be obsessed with helping teams work better together.
People are very concerned about their monthly expenses. We have been looking at launching an income-constrained product for a few months now. And so we did some consumer research and we asked customers what are their concerns, what are they focused on? And over 75% of the folks that we surveyed said that they had concerns about their monthly expenses. Our most recent survey on mobile said that over 50% price is the primary consideration when they're choosing a mobile provider. And so it's up to us now to pull together products and packages and offers that meet our customer needs. They are looking for quality and they are looking for value, but they have to have pricing value that meets their needs.
Right. I think came out that in one little survey area, we may now have 23% more oil and gas than we thought. So let's add all this stuff up. And if you ask, why are we doing this? If you add all this up and we come back and we have $100 trillion, $200 trillion of assets against 36 trillion in debt, what will that do to the 10-year interest rate? I mean, I think it would probably have an effect where people would say, hey, this kind of revenue from the asset side of their name, they're going to pay down their debt, they're going to balance the budget, and then we lower the interest cost. And every time we get a click down on the interest cost, that saves everybody that's listening and their children and their children's children. It saves them money because, interest costs right now, that's the way. If you want to reduce government spending, reduce the interest rate.
I want to squeeze in one last question. The president's tone on renewable energy has been pretty hostile. And one of your first moves was to kill an offshore project in New York called Empire Wind. There are a lot of people here that are thinking about investing hundreds of millions of dollars in wind, solar, offshore wind projects. Should these people be taking their investments elsewhere to other countries, or can you reassure them of the permits and promises of the U.S. government on the books?
I wouldn't say that there's any hostility towards quote renewables. There's hostility or at least concern about that we've gone too far towards massive tax subsidies for sources of energy that are by definition intermittent. The wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day and the sun doesn't shine ever 24 hours a day. I mean, solar itself is effectively a system where there's a catastrophic failure every night because there's no sun shining and then there's no electricity produced. And people say, oh, there's hope for batteries. And yes, there are. But having spent, 30 years in tech, I mean, batteries get better at about 2% a year. They're not running on Moore's law. There's not some magical solution that's appeared yet where we could have cheap and affordable load shifting by using batteries in conjunction with internet. I mean, maybe there's some incremental solutions, but not at the scale we need, and not at the scale we need when we've got more demand for electricity than ever before than we do right now. And in terms of offshore wind is like 3 times more expensive than onshore. And I can tell you, we're a big wind producer in North Dakota, but there was a lot of sense of, hey, not my backyard. There's people that don't want wind projects that cover 8,000 acres, that is in their thing. And there's people that live in urban areas that want them all in the rural areas because they don't want to look at them either. And then you put them offshore, the people on the shore don't want to look at them. And then of course, there's been the whole case around renewables was those were the folks that cared the most about the environment. And there's a report on Empire Wind that was not released by the Biden administration that talks about when you put 3.2 billion tons of rock in the water, when you put 1,000 foot towers, then all of a sudden you're affecting fisheries, you're affecting shipping, you're affecting the sonar capability of whales, you're affecting a lot of things. And if a report like that had come out against a road equipment, I mean, I've even seen, samples that look as nice as any granite countertop, and they're 30% by weight CO2. So the innovation that could come from solving this problem is massive. But we're not going to get there bankrupting ourselves, chasing a climate extremism ideology that's turned into a giant business that feeds lawyers and feeds funding and feeds organizations around that. We have to just sit back as a country and go, hey, who are we competing with? Who's been successful? Who's bringing manufacturing? Who's generating AI capability? And what do we have to do to do that? And energy policy is not a separate industry. Energy supports every other industry. And energy right now, for AI data centers, we're not like processing health claims or doing that. An AI data center is manufacturing intelligence. And when we manufacture intelligence, that's what allows us to have a successful defense of our country. That's what allows us to cure cancer. That's what's going to allow us to transform education and healthcare and every other thing that we do. And so the power there is an urgency where we do not have enough power. Because, by the way, China's also opening up 30 coal plants, spending over $100 billion on hydro. We may be ahead of them on the technology for AI. They're way ahead of us in terms of building the horsepower to power that, because this is where you convert a kilowatt of electricity into intelligence. That's never happened in humankind. I think we need to understand that we're at a moment in this planet's history where everything is about ready to change, and so we need to have the humility to understand enough power to do it.
Secretary Burgum, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
An executive order outlining what Mississippi's goals are in the AI space. We also created what's called what we call MAIN, which is Mississippi's AI Network, which consists of all of our community colleges, we have 8 institutions of higher learning, including our historically Black colleges, and we have one-stop shop focused on how are we going to train the workforce of tomorrow. And I think if you talk to a lot of the players in the AI space, Mississippi is actually far ahead of many other places in terms of creating exactly what that looks like. How are we training folks in our community colleges to be prepared for those jobs? How are we actually creating 4-year degree programs for people in that space? And it's going incredibly well, and we think we're setting ourselves up for success in the future.
It's very early, but just what does it mean that you set up these institutions? There's the network, which I think no other state has.
I think that's right.
But yeah, but are there early conclusions from what you've seen already?
Well, what I would tell you is it is very early.
Yeah.
But we were actually out in California for a conference recently, and our head of workforce development, workforce training, was on a panel. And the person that was doing the panel basically commented that Mississippi is way further ahead than California, which was a shock to many of the people in the room. But we're also further ahead than most. And so what we're seeing, and now we're getting more and more partnerships.
Billion small businesses in 190 countries and territories around the world. the overwhelming majority of them are outside of the United States. And so what we're hearing from small business owners who are selling from South Korea to Latin America or from China to the Middle East is that the macroeconomy clearly is going through disruption, like the early first few months of COVID. But in that disruption, there's innovation and opportunity, and it's not deglobalization, it's diversification. And there's a confidence and an optimism from SMBs around the world to be more resilient, more diversified in their franchises. So that would be the primary thing.
That would be what you start with. Gene, what would you say? So Follow is a payment technology company, Africa focused, where consumers and global companies get paid and pay across Africa. What we've seen so far has never been any different from the previous data we have. But we think over time there will be a natural value chain impact to African companies. Obviously, there's a lot of trade between Africa and the US, Africa and the UK, Africa and China. And over time, there could be some impact regarding how that happens. But right now, it's very early days for us. We're hoping, we'll see much impact going forward.
Do you have to be 5 times safer, 10 times safer?
I think it's gotta be approaching the 10x safer. Humans understand that humans are fallible. They're not okay with software, in the world of AI being fallible, or certainly these mistakes happen on the road. So I do think that superhuman safety is an absolute prerogative of the business.
Elon Musk seems to think that Tesla does not need, the Tesla can dominate the robotaxi business without it. And that, they have a huge brand, he has a huge, media network. Do you think that's right, or how worried are you about that?
So I don't think that there will be a winner take all. The drama is winner take all, but I think that the transportation industry is $1 trillion+ industry. You could argue that rideshare is going to be finally beat personal car ownership in a world where you've got robots driving all over the place. So I think there'll be plenty of room in the industry. We'd love to work with them. But I do think you're going to have multiple players. Some of them are going to go direct, and some of them are going to go through networks like ours.
Do you have an effect?
Yeah.
What is that?
I have a Tesla. Very fun.
Have you tried full self-driving?
Yes.
What do you think of it?
It is delightful, but I have to take over every once in a while. It is an absolutely great product. And again, the cars are terrific.
At Tesla, a bit of a meme stock. It's been trading between $200 and $450 a share for a while now.
I'm not a Wall Street.
Quite up and down, but if what you say is true, that basically ultimately cars are cars, that it's kind of a tough business. At what price point would you buy a share of Tesla?
I have no idea. I'm the car. I don't need to know.
But by your theory, that company wildly overvalued. Is that what you believe?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there won't be a winner take all. The market is too large.
Their value is so there.
I think that their value based on both autonomous and robotics, etc. But I'll leave up to the Wall Street analysts.
There is a sense that Elon's pivoting hard from cars to robots. He's gotten a little bored with cars. Would you encourage that?
I don't know. I can't speak to whether he's getting bored with cars, but the OEM business, the traditional car manufacturing business, is a really, really tough business. And if you're going to sell globally, you're going to have to compete with the Chinese auto manufacturers. And
what had happened was that U.S. enrichment capacity got squeezed out of the marketplace, really by prices. And we haven't launched the construction of a meaningful amount of nuclear capacity for decades. So we've sort of, most of our enriched uranium material for commercial reactors comes from overseas. Now we've got a bunch of small modular reactor companies, some really exciting new technologies. We've got, with an outlook for significant growth in demand for new electricity in the United States, there's interest in building large reactors again, despite the cost overruns at Vogtle. The last ones were built at less cost than the first unit at Vogtle. So I think we would like to see a renaissance of nuclear. Now, I know the renaissance of nuclear has been talked about for a long time. I think the conditions are there, and the administration is going to do everything we can to lean in to help commercial businesses and customers launch nuclear. We are offering up land in Department of Energy facilities for people that want to build things. We're making it easier to test reactors at a demonstration site at the Idaho National Labs. We recently announced supplying HALEU fuel, which is instead of enriched in that 3 to 5% in a typical light water reactor, it's 20% enriched uranium for next generation reactors. We announced delivering that fuel to 5 of these next generation reactor companies. We're also using the Loan Program Office in situations where, for example, hyperscalers so want to see new electric and nuclear generation capacity, they'll put up large chunks of equity money to help, because utilities don't have the balance sheets or the risk tolerance to build nuclear power plants. But if you can have offtake customers that are well capitalized, put up a large amount of equity together with the developers to secure a execution of these projects, LPO office will come in with debt that makes the capital stack work so we can get plants built. Once they get built, contract financing will take out the LPO debt and we can recycle that into other projects. I'd like to not get in the position we're in, for example, with wind power, where the tax subsidies came in 32 years ago and they're still here today. You put subsidies into tax credits, they tend to be very sticky. So what we're doing at the Department of Energy is specific deals that are going to hopefully launch the first 5, 7, 8, 10, 20 reactors. And let's get this industry going again. Then we'll get supply chain efficiencies and volume. Costs will come down. And I think it should fly very well as a commercial industry. I celebrate that. The goal of the president is to get all of the nations of the world equally welcoming to American exports as we've been to their exports. That's a grow trade agenda. The other piece of the president's agenda is to try to find the right incentives to reshore manufacturing in the United States. Over the last 25 years, a lot of energy-intensive manufacturing has left the United States. Well, we can buy it cheaper from Asia, people said. So, no big deal. But those jobs, in large-scale industrial jobs and energy-intensive manufacturing, they tend to be blue-collar. They're often concentrated in rural areas. This is just the demographic that's had a rough ride in the last 30 years. You lived in an urban area and you're highly educated. Boy, it's been a great few decades. I've been very lucky in my life. But if you grew up in a rural area or a less thriving community and didn't get the same educational opportunity as the rest of us, your economic opportunities have actually gotten worse. The president is deeply committed to make the economic opportunities better for those people. And so he wants an agenda that makes it compelling to invest in the United States and put those jobs here. And the last thing, as an energy nerd, can I repeat my course? So manufacturing, people, when we think about energy, people either talk about the electricity grid or they talk about automobiles. And of course, those are important and real uses of energy, and I love the electricity grid. But the energy delivered on the electricity grid to end users represents 20% of total global energy. People think it's like the same thing. It's a piece, it's a sliver. We use about a quarter of energy for transportation. But the biggest use of energy by far is manufacturing, making things. And you can't make an automobile or a building or an internet or an airplane without materials. We spend 20% of all global energy just to make cement, steel, plastics, and fertilizer. The 4 pillars of the modern world. 20% of energy just to make those 4. We use over 40% of global energy just to make things. Aluminum and other metals and polysilicon and all these materials. This is the base of which everything else is made of. So it's over 40% globally. In the United States, we consume 25 exajoules of energy for manufacturing out of 100 exajoules total. So only 25% of our energy is used for manufacturing, and that's because so much of it's been outsourced. China consumes 70 exajoules for manufacturing. So you can see where most of the industry that's left Europe and the United States has gone to China and elsewhere in Asia. So the president's agenda is, let's bring some of that manufacturing back to the United States. Let's bring those jobs. Let's bring that economic security. We have the most advantageous energy system on the planet here.